Hello, BookTube. I've got some new arrivals I want to show you, a mixture of fiction and nonfiction, and we'll see if any of them strike your fancy. That's what these new arrival videos are for. They're so that you are forewarned of what's coming out, so that you can decide ahead of time, do I want to be on the lookout for that? Or do I want to ask my bookstore to order it? Which is a reality now that superstores are in decline, that most people, if they have, I think most people, if they have a bookstore anywhere nearby, it's going to be a smaller, more independent bookstore that might leave a lot of new inventory for special orders rather than risk speculating. That's actually a wise business model that used to be true of most bookstores, no matter how big they were. But that's what these videos are for. They're to show you what's coming up, at least what I get, so that you know and can plan accordingly. And this first one is a piece of nonfiction. I did not see it coming, but I'm interested in it. It comes out in the third week of March, and it's Nicholas Delbanco. It's Why Writing Matters. And this is a new contribution to the Yale University Press's Why X Matters. So you get an author to do, why physics matters, why public protest matters. In this case, it's Why Writing Matters. A distinguished writer and scholar tackles central questions in the discipline of writing. Drawing on his own experience with mentors such as John Updike, John Gardner, and James Baldwin, and in turn having taught such rising stars as Jasmine Ward, Delbanco looks at questions of influence and the contradictory simultaneous impulses towards imitation and originality. Part memoir, part literary history, and part analysis, this unique text will resonate with students, writers, writing teachers, and bibliophiles. And I'm all on board with those. And I have been at one point or another all four of those things. So this comes out later in the month, and it's right up my alley. So I will be reading it. I will be reviewing it, and I thought you want to know about it. This next one is also from Yale, I believe. Yes, but this is far more scholarly. This is something that won't appeal to everybody. I myself have a venue to review this sort of thing, and therefore I have read a lot of it over the years, over the 10 years, and developed a sweet tooth for it. But this is Ian Collar is the author, and it's called Muslims and Citizens, Islam, Politics, and the French Revolution. And this comes out on March the 20th. Or that's the date. I mean, it's an academic press, and it's an abstruse subject, so if a bookstore gets this at all, they'll put it out whenever they get it. I don't think this is embargoed in any way. From the beginning, French revolutionaries imagined their transformation as a universal one that might include Muslims, Europe's most immediate neighbors. They believed in a world in which Muslims could and would be French citizens, but they disagreed violently about how to implement their visions of universalism and accommodate religious and social difference. In this book, the author examines how Muslims came to participate in the political struggles of the revolution and how revolutionaries used Muslims in France and beyond as a test case for their ideals. And it's just fascinating to me. Like I said, I write occasionally for foreign venues, and including a couple in the Muslim world. And so I naturally skew towards these books as being of interest to that audience, and that has caused me to read a lot more of these books than I might have otherwise done. So stuff like this, I have a shelf, I have a whole bookcase that is just a library of Muslim world topics, Western treaties or treatments in scholarly form, in general form, in fictional form of Muslim subjects. Just fascinating. And this next one is a historical novel. This is a finished copy. This is one of two works of fiction in this new arrivals, and it is one of two fictions, two novels as well. This one won't be. Sorry, I've got a million things stuck in this thing. This one won't be as well known as the second fictional thing. But this is by Marina Kemp. We've already seen this. We saw the advanced copy of this. This is Marina Kemp. I think this is her debut. Yeah, this is her debut, Marguerite. Lovely, understated thing. Coming out. When in March are you coming out? The 24th. March the 24th. In this book, let's see, it brings to life Marguerite Demers, a young nurse from Paris who finds herself confronting the guilt she carries from her past. Taking you deep into the French countryside, the author immerses you in the isolation of living in a small town. What's so bad about living in a small town? Marguerite is 25 when she arrives in the sleepy southern village of Saint-Sulpice to take up a job as a live-in nurse. Her charge is Jerome Lanvier, once one of the most powerful men in the village, now dying alone in his large and secluded house surrounded by rambling, neglected gardens. Manipulative and tyrannical, Jerome has scared away all his previous caretakers. It's not long before the villagers have formed opinions about Marguerite, and we get the pub sheet gives us a rundown of what those opinions are. They were all over the map, as you would guess. If you've ever been a visitor or a newcomer to a small town, it's amazing how fast the word spreads. Just amazing. I took a friend once to a small town in Iowa, and my friend was from a suburb of Chicago, and he was gorgeous, just gorgeous, just the beautiful black hair, beautiful handsome face, and a body just bristling with muscles. Bristling with him, just a six-pack ab, gigantic defined pecs and chest and shoulders and arms. And he was fond of of running. He was fond of going running. And we went to this little town in summer, and he ran the circumference of the town. I showed him the circumference of the town ahead of time. He ran the circumference of the town with no shirt on. And by the time he got back from his starting point, everyone in town had been alerted to this fact. That's the way it is in a small town. Well, I imagine Marguerite's probably having a harder time than that. And the author was born in London, where she lives now with her husband and daughter. She studied classics at Oxford University and creative writing at Goldsmiths, and this is her first book. So this comes out later in March. If it sounds of interest to you, it certainly sounds of interest to me. So then our next one here is a huge work of history. This is the finished copy. I think we've already seen this finished copy, or we've certainly seen the advanced copy. This is going to get reviewed widely, I think. And good Lord, good Lord, will you look at this? Okay, well, I don't need the Douay Bible here. Let's just go to and actually I don't need anything at all, because the book sort of introduces itself. The pub date on this is March the 3rd, and it is by Richard Frank, and it is Tower of Skulls. This is a big fat history of the Pacific Theater in World War II. So what have we got here? Outside of Beijing, over the Yongding River, stretches the Marco Polo Bridge. In 1937, as Japanese soldiers conducted exercises nearby, they were surprised by gunshots fired in the dark of night. This event gave the Japanese military leadership an excuse to escalate simmering hostilities with China. The ensuing conflict lasted more than 8 years, expanding to engulf all of Asia and most of the Pacific, and cost more than 20 million lives. Acclaimed author and historian Richard Frank fundamentally shifts readers' understanding of the war on the other side of the globe from Europe by balancing the perspectives between the essentially Pacific conflict of Japan and the United States and the titanic struggle across the Asian continent. For Americans, the story of the Pacific War customarily begins with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. This book is clearly going to take issue with that. The history of the early Japanese expansion is simply an exposition to that opening scene. Events in Asia after Pearl Harbor, when even mentioned, are treated as merely peripheral. In a sweeping narrative that blends military, political, and cultural history, the author, for the first time in any language, integrates the Pacific War with the still larger story of wars between rising Asian nations, fading colonial powers, and the native peoples emerging into their own national identities, laying the groundwork for modern Asia and the international order that prevails today. So, a big thing, and as the pub sheet makes clear, a kind of a frame resetting thing. Challenging reading, and the kind of thing that I can think of 6 regular writers on. The date here is July 1937 to May 1942. I can think of 6 regular writers in America alone that will have to write about this. They'll just have to. It'll be, we'll just see where they write about it. This will get a long write-up in the New York Review of Books, I really bet. My last Boston cream pie on it. But probably elsewhere as well. Definitely elsewhere as well. Looks interesting to me. I have had the advanced copy. I have another copy of the finished copy, so this will be going out in the mail. But I haven't cracked it yet. I am going to have to, since this is Leap Day, I'm going to have to start letting go of my obsessive desire to do right by February. I'm going to have to start letting go of that, because March is here. And I have to dive into that. March is a huge book month. And then there's this last book. This will be the last of our of our new arrivals. Sorry for the spotty treatment here. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, but I wanted to make a few videos today because I like seeing your face. So this comes out on March the 10th. We're going back to fiction. This is fiction that needs no introduction whatsoever. This is The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, the third book in her Cromwell trilogy. The first book, Wolf Hall, won the Booker Prize and was excerpted first, I think, in the TLS. I think I was one of the first people to read that excerpt and say, and I believe I also wrote in maybe in the blog that I kept at the time, that if the rest of the book was as good as this excerpt, it would be the best Tudor historical fiction that has ever been written. Wolf Hall, of course, took off like a tornado. It won the Booker Prize. And then the sequel, Bring Up the Bodies, came out. I reviewed that and also loved it. And now we have the third book. And it also has been excerpted in the current TLS. And let's just see. We'll see what we have here. With The Mirror and the Light, two-time Booker winner Hilary Mantel brings to a triumphant close the historical fiction trilogy she began with Wolf Hall and continued with Bring Up the Bodies, tracing the final years of Thomas Cromwell, the boy from nowhere who climbs to the heights of power in the Tudor court of King Henry VIII. Neither of the earlier books had a cover like this. I don't know. I think that is supposed to be the Tudor Rose. I cannot understand the decision. There had to have been a small but fierce competition to design a cover for this book. There had to be. The people at Henry Holt had to know that all eyes of the literary world would be turned on this thing. Why it's this ugly, I just have no idea. I know I always rail about the requisite hideous American cover, but in this case, good Lord, in this case, virtually anything would have looked better. And so I don't understand this at all. But I guess we won't judge it by its cover. Okay, yeah. In this series finale, Mantel offers a defining portrait of Cromwell as both predator and prey, of a ferocious contest between present and past, and of a fierce and dangerous tug of war between royal will and a common man's vision as they forge a modern nation through conflict, passion, and courage. The setting for The Mirror and the Light is England. May 1536. Anne Boleyn is dead, decapitated in the space of a heartbeat by a hired French executioner. As her remains are bundled up in an empty arrow box, no coffin was provided, Thomas Cromwell breakfasts with the victors. The blacksmith's son from Putney emerges from the spring's bloodbath to continue his climb to power and wealth, while his formidable master, Henry VIII, settles to short-lived happiness with his third queen, Jane Seymour. Cromwell is a man with only his wits to rely on. He has no great family to back him, no private army. Despite rebellion at home, traitors plotting abroad, and the threat of invasion testing Henry's regime to the breaking point, Cromwell's robust imagination sees a new country in the mirror of the future. But can a nation or a person shed the past like a skin? Do the dead continually unbury themselves? What will you do, the Spanish ambassador asked Cromwell, when the king turns on you, as sooner or later he turns on everyone close to him? As the Putney boy rises to status of lord, Cromwell's world comes to a fateful conclusion, one usually reserved for his targets. And of course, I have loved this series, but it takes a willing suspension of disbelief. All historical fiction does, this included, even when it's done this well. It requires a willing suspension of disbelief. And the biggest willing suspension of disbelief in the Cromwell books is, what was that line? The defining portrait of Cromwell as both predator and prey. Cromwell was only predator. He was never prey, except when Henry VIII killed him at the very end. But other than that, all he did was prey on other people. That's all he did. He was a pure, brutal, bare-knuckled, Tudor-era social court climber. There was no limit to what such people were willing to gamble in exchange for hoping to get away with it. That's what Cromwell was. These novels have given rise to a cottage industry of reappraisals of Cromwell that are interesting, but not grounded in fact. Everything we know about Cromwell tells us that he was a soulless brute. And I'll be curious to know, I haven't actually had an advance copy of this book, so I will brush aside most every other commitment to read it right away. But I'm curious to know how the ending is handled. I mean, these things are narrated by Cromwell, so of course we can't have his death. But I'm curious to know how the events that led to his death will be handled, because they are a little murky. They are perfect grounds for a historical novelist. Henry later said often that he had been tricked, maneuvered into disposing of his most faithful servant. He regretted, to the extent that he could ever regret anything, he later regretted having executed Cromwell. I'm wondering if knowing that will cause Hilary Mantel to craft maybe a more subtle portrait of Henry than has existed in the previous two novels, more multifaceted, I don't know. And also, what about Anne of Cleves? It'll be interesting to see. This is what? Am I told? No, I'm not. I'm not told. How long is this thing? This is almost 800 pages long. So it comes out on March the 10th. I'd be willing to bet that is a strict on sale date. And then this meteoric thing, this amazing phenomenon in the 20th century, this Cromwell trilogy, will be over, and we will see. I confess, I loved Wolf Hall, and I thought there's no way possible that this author can sustain that kind of creative brilliance in another novel. This was just a fluke. I believe I said many times to many critics, lightning doesn't strike twice, and then it did. So, so we shall see. I'm not making any predictions about this. I don't want to eat crow twice about the same author. And of course, like everybody else, I'm curious to know how this story will end. I mean, I know how it ends. I know Cromwell's head was stuck on a pike. It was stuck on London Bridge. And it was in a particularly cruel twist of a type that was not Henry's doing. I could point you straight to the person whose idea this was. Henry didn't think this way. In a particularly cruel twist, his head was pointed away from the city of London. So he wasn't able to see the place that he had risen to control. But anyway, I will, of course, report back. I will be reviewing this thing, of course. So that is your new arrivals for today. I don't think anything really matters aside from this one. But The Mirror and the Light, Hilary Mantel, the third and final Oliver Cromwell book. Then Tower of Skulls, and a new reassessment of the Pacific War, long before Pearl Harbor and straight through. Then Marguerite, a historical fiction debut. So you have sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum. This is every historical novelist's dream come true, to have this sort of phenomenon attached to your book. I don't think that Marina Kemp seems to have an entirely different and more somber story involved. And then Muslims and Citizens, the French Revolution, both liking the fact that Muslims were connected and wanting to use them, and also Why Writing Matters by Nicholas Delbanco, which I like that. I like the mention that it is part memoir. That sounds very intriguing. Because I'm sure that he has lots of stories to tell. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Those are some new arrivals for today, and maybe we'll have some new arrivals tomorrow as well. But either way, I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.